Yeah, so I'm very, very passionate about thinking about the role of consciousness in the universe and how humanity has essentially moved. The biggest, I think, advances in human civilization have been these that point away from the human-centric universe, from thinking that the human experience, consciousness, etc., must be so important that the Earth is in the center of the universe. Obviously, that's not the case. We have heliocentricity, that intelligence is so complex, biology is so complex, has to be intelligently designed. Obviously, we have very simple rules for that. Evolutionary biology explains pretty much everything. And then, of course, okay, well, all that's fine, but intelligence cannot be caused by machines, but obviously we now know machines can compute, especially now with language models. The final frontier here, which I think is quite relevant to the DIAC movement, is that this idea that your thoughts are causing your actions and your behaviors, right? And this has been kind of the dogma of a lot of religious thought, as well as other movements in society. But we've known for about 100, 200 years now that there have been challenges to this, the socio-materialist causality, this idea that there's a lot of factors that determine what you're going to do from moment to moment, okay? And thinking may not be one of them, or your ability to cause it. So the idea essentially is that free will is not like nature. This is the theme I want to kind of pepper in throughout my talk, that essentially your conscious thoughts don't actually cause your actions. Albert Einstein firmly believed in this, and he was very famous for not accepting a lot of reward for his Nobel Prizes. It's basically, there's always a chain of thought. You have a will, an idea you have, but you don't have any insight into it. It keeps going back and back, and the physicists have generally been at peace with this idea. I'm just going to put my phone here. But even Charles Darwin himself also was a free will skeptic, and the fundamental thing I want you to take away from this is the idea that actually is very central to my way of thinking, is that the most important discovery in human history will be that we don't have free will, and that will create the most humble and humility-filled societies, right? And I think this is really the promise of AGI. I think AGI is about something else than I think other people are thinking about it. To me, it's about essentially allowing humanity to understand that all your thoughts and all your actions, they come from a very mechanistic or complex system. We can understand it to a substantially good enough level to understand where it all comes from, disease and good things and bad feelings, etc. The dystopia is that we allow the AGIs to take over and create a situation where we're no longer in control, we're no longer the dominant species on the planet. If you want to think of AGI, run away, some of the dystopian ideas. Okay, so I'm going to power through a little bit through why Einstein and Schopenhauer meant by their skepticism. You can turn off if you want, but it's a very simple paradigm. Essentially says that we experience consciousness and we feel like we're agents in the world because there's a sequence of things that happen. You have a thought, I'm going to grab a glass of water, then you grab the glass of water, and you're like, of course my thought caused me to grab the glass of water. But actually, neither is the case, right? Your thoughts come from somewhere deep inside your brain, somewhere. There's a mechanistic, we understand some parts of this. And your actions also come from somewhere. You don't have any, you have insight only up to a certain level. So there's a lot of this is opaque to you. We don't know where thoughts come from. There's like a barrier how far back we go, because there's a lot of subconscious processing that takes. So the neural activity supporting both of these processes, both thinking and action, are opaque to us. We don't really know what they are, right? And this is what neuropsychologists think about, and a lot of people have written about this, including Daniel Wegner. So the first objection that people have is that, well, okay, wait a second, so who's in control of the thoughts, right? How would I survive from day to day? But evolution has actually protected these causal pathways quite well. And the causal pathway is essentially that the thoughts you have are generally very productive, right? It's, don't try to kill yourself or kill everyone, because obviously that won't go well. But the story is obviously much more complex. We actually run a lot of simulations these days. In fact, it's fascinating. You should read Robert Sapolsky's book and others, that we actually have hijacked, humans have so evolved language and reasoning that we've hijacked our dopamine system to run simulations in our brains of conscious things. So we say, how would it feel to punch this person that really offended me? And you get a little bit of dopamine, or you get a little bit of serotonin, or some other type of drug, and then, okay, I'm going to do this, or I'm not going to. So we can run these very complex mind-wandering or imagination experiments, but we also have runaway problems where we get schizophrenia, where like the thoughts come to us and like, oh shit, that's not my thought. Somebody's in my head, the CIA or aliens, right? And that's part of what I also study. And then the behavior is somewhere in that chain of causality also we don't have. It's, again, evolution guarantees or protects that pathway as well. The actions you can actually carry out are also have some of these guarantees for us. And there's a lot of algorithms that go back and forth. There's a Bayesian inference. I won't talk about that so much today. So one of the things that I want to talk about, because it's a DIAC conference, is like, so who cares about any of this stuff like this? Neuroscience has not advanced so far. We can't really do these things. And free will, at least our ability to carry out actions, is safe. But actually, it is not the case, because we kind of figured out in 1965 that prior to carrying out voluntary actions, moving your finger, picking up a glass of water, etc., there's a buildup in neuroactivity that we can detect with 1965 technologies. These microamplifiers they had, you can put them over your motor cortex, and you can see, the next slide actually shows that even prior to being aware, you're aware, you're gonna flick if somebody says flick your wrist randomly, and you do it, prior to the time between thinking about doing it and acting is about 200 milliseconds. This is very little, a fifth of a second. But your brain is actually building up this readiness potential. There's a bit of a buildup in neuroactivity, and we can detect it objectively with 1965 technology. It was so scary at the time that, and I told this anecdote, that the Vatican summoned Michael Gazzaniga, who was one of the founders of cognitive science, to say, hey, what the hell's happening? Do we not have free will anymore? And of course, because there's a lot of stake for this idea that this chain of causality is not in the humanities, humanities sense that we need to send people to hell and we need to do a bunch of things that to keep our societies in a certain structure. But actually, if you zoom out a little bit, predicting actions before we're aware of them is really already old news. Social media companies have been very, very good at this. They can't predict everything we're going to do, but they have hacked our brain chemistry. They're way ahead of what the science of optimal behavior is. And just silly examples I give, Facebook converts an hour of your time for about 30 cents, 30 American dollar cents. YouTube and TikTok, they're very clear, they want all your time. If you can engage all the time on their websites, they will not release you, right? And mobile phone is this new thing where basically people just answer things online to get rewarded. And I don't want to be cynical, I just say the economic pressures on these organizations to really keep going this path. They want so Shoshana Zuboff wrote an entire book on this. I recommend it, you read it, Age of Surveillance Capitalism, although I disagree with some of it. Mind and thought reading technologies are coming. The idea is that the more you give eye tracking, temperature, of course, EEG signals, the more these models that these companies are building of us are going to be better. And mind engineering are coming where we're actually going to be able to input things directly into your brain. Okay, so takeaways here really are a couple or three. Human experience may not be the end goal of our universe. It may be just a type of wrapper or whatever you want to call it on physical processes. Importantly, human consciousness may not be in charge or be as non-corruptible or human decision-making as you may think. And finally, for us, for this conference, essentially that protecting human experience really requires active work. We can't just sit back and expect things to work out. Whatever your beliefs are that there's maybe a omnipotent being taking care of our futures, or otherwise the technology is going to solve it. So we have to be active. All right, so that was the introduction. I'm very worried about the ability to read and build very complex models of humans and then manipulate us and do a bunch of things. And I want to tell you about why whole brain emulation really is a path for us, or at least is a moonshot, an outside path we're pursuing. We also think the chances of succeeding in time may not be great, but we're still doing it. That's part of our work. So they're possible. When I give talks to DIAC people, I do talk a lot about how to protect against mind engineering. I don't have time today, but I decided you can inject noise. People have tried it. Own the data, right? Maybe we can put it on the blockchain. Hardware, we can own hardware. And somewhere down the line is really digitizing humans to actually have a better interface to future technologies, or possibly have transcendence and have digital existence. I don't really talk a lot about this. It's not really my area, human flourishing via the digital realm, but there's just a lot of possibilities that open up if we can achieve this well. And in terms of the DIAC movement, as I mentioned, is an alternative path to AGI. If we can really figure out how the brain works and actually make AGIs that look like human brains or human brain dynamics. So what is whole brain emulation? Again, I'm going to do a relatively quick pass through. I'm going to try to give you a couple of takeaways. Anders and Nick wrote a very good roadmap in 2008. I strongly suggest you read it, although it's about 150 pages and quite mathematical. But all the information is really there. The one-line summary is whole brain emulation is the possible one-to-one modeling of the functioning of the brain. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it's a whole brain emulator is a digital organism that runs on human-like brain dynamics. Either you scan somebody's brain from the structure, from the synapse and molecules, and run down a supercomputer simulation, or you do what we do, which is we record functional activity and then have a computational model that emulates that functional activity. So that's what whole brain emulation is. It's just a digital emulator, a digital organism, and mind uploading is the ability to copy a specific individual. And I think there's a lot of interest in this idea that immortality, like I can copy myself, my specific ideas and synapses and everything, all my memories and childhood memories, etc. So a digital organism that has a very specific mapping or whatever, including memories. Okay, so the main two ideas, I think the main one really is that whole brain emulation, we're trying to bypass neuroscience and reductionism. It's the idea that neuroscience is going way too slow. Trying to build a complete algorithm of how brains work is not going to arrive in time. If AI accelerates at the speed which it does, and we cannot solve agency loss, which is part of my expertise, and I've been thinking about this for about 30 years, we need an alternative, and that's what I think whole-brain emulation is. Yeah, and a lot of practical outcomes. So I've already mentioned, I'm going to talk about 3 types of whole-brain emulation. It's a bit high level, but the idea of behavior only essentially is this idea that can you build a model of somebody, you can just look at their behavioral history, right? From a historical behavior, can I predict what they're going to do? Or can I make a model of them that's just going to behave like them, a little avatar? Behavior science economics, that's basically been what they've been after. This function F that takes historical behavior and predicts future behavior. It's pretty simple. As I already mentioned, a bunch of companies have pretty good Fs for certain types of realms. But now post-LLMs, we're seeing some interesting things. Again, this is still not quite in my expertise. I'm a low-level neuroscientist and neurotech engineer. But we see papers like this where we can take language models and train them on everybody's personalities and then tune them on your personality. So we can do a 2-hour interview with you, and that model already starts to behave like you. So we can get about 85% correct on psych tests. By the way, the baseline is about 20%. That's the control. So you're not really that unique, but obviously there's still very, very coarse models of you, but the technology will probably improve. Basic scientists also advance this, and this is part of what I'm going to talk about. I don't work in humans yet because it's way too complicated. Nobody in whole-brain emulation works in humans. In fact, most people work on C. elegans, it's a 0.5 millimeter worm that has 300 neurons, or fruit flies, which have 100,000 neurons. But we're trying to do it in mice. And it's this idea that you have a much more extensive insight into what the animals are doing for long periods of time. You classify their behaviors, you run neural networks, and then you see if you can make these synthetic worlds in which they behave. So this very low-level version of whole-brain emulation, again, they kind of already exists, and it works in some fields quite well for economic purposes. And I think there'll be increasingly economic pressure to make these better. The structural whole-brain emulation is the more recent one, where now you want to predict future behavior from actual neural reconstruction of the brains, okay? And the way that works, roughly, is usually you have to sacrifice the organism, you have to kill it, because you have to scan the brain with very, very low-level scanning systems. So this is like a electron microscopy system image up here. And then this is an example of the fruit fly that's been done in the last few years. Phenomenal work, fantastic work. And then you have scanned everything, and you have these little computational neurons, or excuse me, representations of neurons, and you make a decision. I'm going to use this thing called cable theory, which is exactly as it sounds, a little bunch of compartments connected together by cables. And then you run a forward model, and like, let's put input into this thing. Does it do what we think it should do? I did a bunch of this work a decade ago when I was at the Allen Institute for Brain Science. The really big flashes you see here, it's layer 4 of cortex, and gets a whole bunch of input, like visual information, and then it propagates. These single neurons have 100 to 1,000 little compartments. Every neuron's being broken up into these little pieces, and every little piece has multiple differential equations that are running across them. Okay. More recently, we're starting to make a bit of progress. Light microscopy is a bunch of better versions of doing scanning, but actually the scanning is not the problem, it's the reconstruction. So we can spend lots and lots of money scanning the brain of a cubic millimeter of a mouse brain of a human. Takes multiple teams, including Harvard and Stanford, and said it's still very, very, very difficult to do this. But the challenge really is on reconstruction, because the planes, when you scan and you shave off like 50 nanometers or 8 nanometers, you have to put the top layer on the next layer and the next layer, and you have to be able to reconstruct and trace all the neurons throughout the brain. So it's challenging, but people are making progress. Google's involved, and a bunch of other organizations. And now we're also trying to do the model. So we have some version of the model. We're trying to do that's emulation. We try to play, as I showed you here, these videos. And there's some progress in that with Philip Hsu, who we've been talking to for the last few months, trying to make some of that progress. Okay, so the last bit of whole-brain emulation I'm going to tell you about is the part that we're doing. And it's the most recent version, in my opinion. It's essentially, we're trying to figure out if there's another way to do it and try to emulate the large language model revolution. So we're trying to figure out, is there a way to just get sparse brain activity from a live organism without killing it, and its behavior, and then model it, right? So we have a brain, let's say this is a mouse brain, we can record from 10 brain areas, or 20 brain areas, or 30 brain areas, but we can record for a very long time, weeks, months, possibly years, and then jointly model all that brain activity. So usually those cubes, we try to see how those brain dynamics predict the behavior, and we create a model called an emulator. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. And the goal really is to be able to test these. You have to generate petabyte and exabyte scale behavior neural data sets and train foundation models to achieve this. This is our kind of silly little video of like how you basically take compartments or voxels out of the mouse brain, you model them, you feed them to a supercomputer, and that supercomputer will then be able to run an emulation of the mouse. All right, so the analogy here is pretty straightforward. Essentially, large language models learn language dynamics, so you provide sequences of words, and they get better and better. The more data you give them, at some point they're going to be perfect modeling the world. At some point they're going to have consciousness. We don't really know. And whole brain models are very similar to that, except that we're going backwards here. We need more and more fine data and larger data sets. As I mentioned before, Google Facebook, TikTok, they're right here. All they have is online behavior. They want more. They're going to want your EEG signals and your biometric signals, and they're probably going to get better. And we're trying, Netho Labs is somewhere around here. We're trying to be the first to put these points on this curve, this kind of scaling law. Yeah, and this is just a map of low 5 versus, okay. So achieving functional whole brain emulation is essentially pretty much identical to achieving large language models. We just need the data, right? So we computed in Netho Labs that we could generate the entire size of the internet in about a year with enough funding. And I'm not talking hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not that much money. So we can generate data sets that are equivalent of what ChatGPT was trained on in about a year to a year and a half of scaling. So the last bit is really about Netho Labs. Plug, not plug, just to let you guys what we're trying to do and how much progress we've made. So we want to create the first mammalian upload. The rodent brain is our goal because it's highly homologous to human brain. It's a mammal. It does a lot of similar things. The anatomy is quite similar there, as I write, 95% anatomy, et cetera. We're very, very interested in social things because a lot of people are interested in figuring out what is driving cooperative behavior and social behaviors and love and all that stuff versus the other aggressive, negative things, right? So rodents are extremely complex. They do social things. Even mice that are inbred, like a really, really inbred, which is the mice that everybody uses in clinical neuroscience, have extremely complex behaviors. We're seeing now just random things. They throw dirt at each other to play with each other. I've never seen that before. I don't think anybody's ever reported it, and we're starting to record a lot. But they also do other things. They like to enforce hierarchies, even when they're safe, et cetera. They like to fight. And we have built systems that can actually track all this video. This is about 4 times slower than real time. And these guys have been living together about 4 months or 5 months at this point, but they need to establish dominance. So the alpha will start biting the other ones, and they'll fight back. We want to understand all of that. Right? So imagine this happening with neural implants. We're not quite there yet, but we're going to have neural implants as well at the same time. So last few years of research, I've changed. As I mentioned, I was going to work just on the circuit of sense of agency, the feeling that you're in control of things. There's some circuits in the brain. Nobody has these models. Actually, I have a Swiss National Science Foundation grant to do that. But I've been increasingly interested in AI safety because it's just things are moving extremely, extremely fast. I've done a bunch of things. You're welcome to look those up. And now I have some base funding from Foresight. We're very thankful for support to create this thing called Scalable Whole-Brain Emulation Roadmap. And what that looks like is exactly like I said, we want to start with the technology of today, which is record from 10, 15, 20, 50 brain areas, let's say. Build these models, this little orange is supposed to match this one. Build a model of that, okay. The technology moves in a year, it gets a little better. We'll build the next version, et cetera, and look at scaling laws. Is there an echo in here? We'll build scaling laws, and we'll actually show that there's a path to achieving this in the short term. So our achievements for the past 10 months, we do a lot of stuff. We have lab space in Imperial and Sussex. We're building custom whole brain emulation technology, including loggers, et cetera. I don't know how many neurotech people are in here that do hardware. We built arenas and cages. We're still not sure. Anyways, I don't talk too much about that. And we already started collecting data. We have literally 1 billion frames of video in just like less than a month. We're already trying to figure out where we're going to store a petabyte of data in a few months because it's challenging. If you have ideas and or suggestions, please let us know. This is our team. Basically, it's a few PhDs, and we're trying to onboard actually a lot of more junior trainees to expose them to these ideas. And everybody's very excited and wants to work for us, but we don't have so much capacity. Liam Paniski, my ex-postdoc advisor, is one of our advisors now, and Gary Lavis, who talks a lot about mouse empathy and actually just how the translation crisis and the replication crisis in biology, how they simply and utterly come from improperly designed and lack of naturalism in research. So that's my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Again, Foresight and the Swiss National Science Foundation are supporting us. Thank you.
We have time for maybe one question, and Barrett will get ready.
Thank you for the talk.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, lots of interesting ideas and images and concepts. One clarifying question: Could you please show the slide where you are mentioning that the whole-brain emulation roadmap is not reductionistic and transcends neuroscience or something like that?
Sure. You mean this one, right? When I talk about
yeah, before. Yes, main ideas. So, hypothesis bypasses neuroscience and reductionism. What does it mean? I think that the roadmap is very reductionistic, and it doesn't bypass neuroscience. It's just a part of neuroscience. I think it's just a reasonable direction inside neuroscience. What did you mean? And the other is do you have any timelines? I understand this is very early stage of technology, and do you have any prediction?
So what I mean by whole-brain emulation science, or the science of whole-brain dynamical modeling, is that we don't have to derive equations, right? We can just have black boxes that solve the brain for us. And that's both the structural and the functional. Probably that's what it's going to look like. We're going to put all this data into a big black box, and it's going to give us output.
So you mean bypasses the existing models? Okay, sure.
It bypasses the need to have chains of causality, right? So I again, because the limitation of time, I don't usually give all the bits of my talks, but basically, the history of neuroscience looks something like this. Everybody wants to have this forward model of the brain, how brains work, right? From molecules to cells to synapses, et cetera. We're doing great here because they're a very simple system. We have no idea what's happening up here. And in fact, we have no mechanisms for consciousness, zero. But what we're starting to do is we're putting artificial neural networks, so putting black boxes to give us practical outcomes, right? Evolution may not wait for us to do other things. So there's we're filling in a lot of the missing information with black boxes. And we, as a society, we may decide that we need those things sooner than later, and we may be happy with them. In terms of timelines, I can't speculate. I mean, this is not a VC fundraising, so I would tell you different things in different circumstances, but the one thing I will respond to the other question as well, we'd love to stay nonprofit. Right now we have non-diluting funding. And both ARIA and Convergent Research, they liked us, they put us into second round, but then they said, go get VC money. And we can get VC money, but all this data goes behind a closed door, and then we end up probably in an open, if we're successful enough, we're not in a really weird situation where we're gonna build this extraordinary technology that we're not even gonna own. I won't own it. Like in 2 or 3 funding rounds, I'm not gonna own anything. But I'll keep doing it probably to some level. So does the community want this? Does the decentralized science community want these types of technologies? There has to be a decision be made pretty soon, because we're not the only ones. There are other people coming in. I hope that helps.
Great, thank you so much. There will be